Welcome into the Husker247 Podcast. I'm Mike Schaefer, joined by Michael Bruntz, Brian Christopherson here on Tuesday morning. Gentlemen, did you think that the blown tire on your way to Bloomington was going to be as big of an omen as it turned out to be for Nebraska football?
I mean, looking back on it, it was pretty appropriate. I mean, I think I told somebody after the game we should have seen it as a sign and just
stayed home,
parked it at home. But it ended up fine. We got there, but yeah, it was very appropriate. Barely got out of Lincoln, which is probably the way everything lined up there.
Which one of you actually changed the tire?
Bruntz did. Bruntz not only changed it, I would say Bruntz did it in such a fashion that he was like looking forward to it.
Bruntz, have you changed many tires before?
That was a first on the side of a highway. I've been fortunate to this point that every tire issue I've ever had has been like you come out of your house and like you've got like a bleeder, like it's slowly bleeding out in the driveway or a parking lot or something like that, or else like it's been so bad that like there's no hope of change it. Like I've blown 2 tires before twice, so it was just like no options. You're dead to the water, dead to rights. So yeah, that was a new one. BC was handling the customer service people at our particular rental car company that we rented from. We're not going to mention them, but because they did end up taking care of us all in a very roundabout way. But yeah, he was on the phone with somebody. I don't know where they were, but he was patient in the face of strife.
I have been there. I have experience with rental cars and blown tires, and it has never been fun. So my sympathy as you went for that. My sympathy is you had to drive to Bloomington and then drive back and then also sit through that game in person. So you have all of my sympathy. Let's just move right into
I do have to say one thing.
You got more? You want?
I have one more thing. I will say the saving grace of that whole trip was the like 9-foot giant Larry Bird statue that we saw after dinner on Saturday. That kind of saved the whole thing, I think.
In Terre Haute.
Yeah, they've got like it's how tall would you say that thing is, Brian? It's like
it was like 2 Larry Birds at least, I think.
Yeah, it was like the kind of statue you would see in like a country underneath a dictator where they're like it's like paying homage to their dictator.
Are you comparing Indiana to the former Soviet Union?
It would not have looked out of place in Yugoslavia in 1983, probably.
Terre Haute is Leningrad.
Yeah. Well.
The funny part is, Bruntz was like, "Oh, the bird statue's right around here." So we walk, and his phone is showing like we're right there. And we walk, for some reason, we didn't see it right to our left. This giant, I mean, it was dark, but we didn't see this 12 to 15 foot statue or whatever it is.
Yeah.
So we go around the whole building, and it was just kind of a chuckle that we couldn't spot this massive statue. But
would you rank the Larry Bird statue over the Pittsburgh Airport Franco Harris statue? Like if you're giving me your statue rankings.
The bird statue was more impressive. The Franco Harris one was more remarkable for its randomness because it was just like on a landing, like a landing between like 2 escalators. It was like, okay, we've got this thing of Franco. We got to put it somewhere. How about over there? That's where we're putting it.
Is it the Pound the Rock? It just got moved enough times and now it's just sitting in the airport?
Yeah, we're like 10 years away from Franco Harris being in some bushes outside of baggage claim, I think.
Okay.
Anyways, I didn't mean to. We've gone too long on statues, but
I think people would rather hear you guys talk about blown tires and statues than they would the Nebraska football game on Saturday. So,
yeah.
But we're gonna fast forward past the game and we're gonna get right into Matt Rhule's comments. We know what he said after the game, But I'm always kind of fascinated how coaches approach the press conference on Monday because they had to rewatch that film. They know there's going to be different questions coming out of it, and there's an expectation for some answers to be given as to what actually happened. And so Brian, what kind of stood out to you about how Matt Rhule approached the Monday press conference and what he had to say about Nebraska's performance against Indiana?
Well, on each side of the ball, there was a main topic. You could have picked from about 10 to 15 things you didn't like, but each one had one that I think stood out. On defense, it was the tackling, which he says was basically the worst they've had. And on offense, it was the perimeter blocking. And I'll focus on the latter a little bit because for an offense that is absolutely searching for things and the run game is what it is, you've got to have that component to offer a little bit of an assist to your quarterback, who I don't think played his best game at all. I thought he was a little late on some throws and stuff like that, but you've got to have those plays where, okay, you throw a bubble screen to Ja'Cory Barney, your 210-pound guy needs to take care of the 175-pound cornerback and make that at least like a 6 or 7 yard play and play the game within the, a good down and distance. And so I think you could just highlight that like one point. It's like something Nebraska should be better at and has to be, and it just completely failed. Like Indiana won 90% of the one-on-ones in that game, and we're not just talking about jump balls. We're talking about all these things where guys are scooting past blocks and getting to Husker ball carriers and just making the plays look easy. And so I thought you could tell how disappointed he was in that particular facet of the game. And the other thing, I guess, is I understood what he was saying. There is a point in a game like that where you decide how you want to lose. Like, are we going to lose this game and try to get it to the station where it's 38-7 and just do, what I mean? Like whatever you can to kind of keep the score down a little bit. Or are you going to keep pressing on the pedal and maybe it gets to 56-7 or something like that? He chose the latter. He wanted Dylan and some of those guys to work through it. The question going forward is, does it have an after effect when you lose a game so dramatically in that fashion? And is the payoff worth it? I'm not sure, but that's what they did. And it was kind of interesting hearing his explanation about that, working through like, how do you handle it as a coach when this game is obviously off the rails? Like, what's your mode of operation at that point?
Bruntz, what did you make of Nebraska's perimeter blocking on Saturday? I mean, obviously you guys were up in the press box. You have the good level to kind of be able to see as everything's kind of developing. They're calling a lot of those screens. Were you surprised they kept going back to that well, even though it wasn't working?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm not surprised because I guess what's the alternative? And, I think at some point you just need somebody to make a block. Like, I was going back through it in my head. I was like, how many plays could I point to that Nebraska made during that game where I was like, that's a great play. Like, that's a play that I'm going to file away. And it's like the Fedoni block after he had whiffed on the play before. I mean, credit to him for coming back and doing it. I'm roundabout getting to your question. The Bayer sack where there was a guy running open up the seam, and they were still able to, luckily get Rourke on the ground. But beyond that, I mean, there weren't a ton of other plays where you're like, okay, this play goes in the win column for Nebraska. And I think the perimeter blocking is one of those situations where like you just might not be able to trust some guys to do that. Like if you're going to continue to have that be a part of your offense, you might need to say, look, we just need Alex Bullock out there. Like that's the way this is going to work. And that he did a good job, I think. Was it against Rutgers or Purdue? One of the two. Yeah. Purdue, yeah. I mean, you might just have to do that because the thing about it is it's not like you're getting a ton of one-on-one wins right now in the passing game as it is. So, I mean, if that's going to function as kind of an extension of your run game, you got to find ways to make that work. But I think that's been probably the most disappointing thing about, maybe not the most, but I mean, there's been a number of disappointing things about the offense. But to me, it's a little bit about coaching. It's a little bit about effort. It's technique. I mean, it's want to, and it just, for whatever reason, that's not clicking there. So I'm not particularly surprised that they continue to go there because they weren't running the ball against Indiana with any kind of consistency. But they've got to get that figured out, because that's how you get the ball in space. That's how you get the ball in playmakers' hands, and you just can't keep having those plays getting blown up.
BT, we'll hear from Marcus Satterfield later on Tuesday. We're recording this here at 9:45. What changes, if anything, with Nebraska's wide receiver picture? Because, they weren't a team throwing a ton of screens 4 weeks ago, and their last loss to Illinois, they were throwing the ball all over the yard against a defense that's turned out to be at times pretty good and at times, not so good. But I guess the sort of question I have is, can you change the personnel and get better blockers out there without sacrificing the ability to also have a passing game?
Yeah, that's kind of the rub there. I don't know that you can, honestly. They're in a pickle. And I guess the other thing I felt Saturday that I kind of hope they go away from, even in this game, even if it gets a little ugly, is I felt it was just so tentative, like in everything they did in the passing game. Like, if you're going to go down sort of like Rhule's talking about in flames, I would have liked to have seen them let it rip with the passing game a little bit more. And I know sometimes guys weren't as open. So this is like, okay, well, who are you throwing to if there's not the space? But there were times I think it was there I just didn't feel like they ever like pressed that pedal to attack downfield in that game. You know what I mean? And you got a quarterback with the big arm. And I think, ever since that, I guess the interception against Rutgers, right? Where he didn't see the guy and they returned it to Nebraska's side. That was in the second quarter, I think. It feels like the last 6 quarters or so since then have just sort of lost that like downfield aggression in the passing game. And that's a very general take, I understand. And there's a lot of finer points to why that might have happened. And Dylan Rila could sit through the film and the receivers couldn't show you this is why I didn't do that. So I always respect that. But I do think, I think in a game like this, you heard Rhule the other day talk about, okay, Ohio State has all these NFL guys. You guys think some of you guys want to play in the NFL? You got to have that mindset. Like, I'm an NFL player too, and I'm going to go. And so with that, I think you have to attack in this game, even when everybody on their couch and here is saying it's not going to go well. You don't have a chance. You have to have that mindset. We're going to attack more of this game and have some of that aggression. I feel it's lacked in the passing game. But back to your question, I think it's a tough spot because the best weapons they have at receiver have not blocked well on the perimeter. And so you can change that up, but you lose what I'm talking about, So it's hard. There's not an easy answer. I know this is a part of the season where we get to that question of, what can you bring these guys who are behind the curtain in and all that? That always sounds good. Maybe there's one or two who can do something, but you guys know, like in the heat of battle, usually no one just comes out of nowhere and steps in and is all of a sudden playing 30 snaps or something like that, some young guy. So I don't think that's necessarily a big part of it either, unless we're talking about like if Bly Hill pops in on the defense, or something like that.
Bruntz, just staying with the offense here, and then we'll switch over to the defensive side of the ball. Just as you kind of size up the issues, and we're talking a lot about perimeter blocking, but it goes beyond that. I mean, we talk a lot about Nebraska trying to find its identity. Through 7 games, at this point, do we have any idea what it is Nebraska wants to do to attack and stress teams anymore?
No, I don't. No, we don't.
And the follow-up, because it's kind of a leading question, the follow-up basically, where do they kind of go from here? Like that has to be sort of the big thing moving forward is, we talk about having pet plays or easy plays or the stuff that you do well. At this point, I don't know that I could say there's a single play Nebraska can run that they're doing well at this point in time.
Yeah, it's that's kind of a good summation. I thought Matt Rhule was pretty right on after the game when he said everything that we're doing on offense right now, it looks like it's so difficult to do. Like there's no easy, like we're going to line up and get 5 yards here. There's no quick out. There's no run that you can go to and count on. I think they can piece things together enough. I mean, they're not an explosive offense right now. And yeah, that's kind of where they're at. So, you know, we hear a lot that, you know, you want it to be a big guy game where you're bringing in extra linemen and you got the fullbacks in there. And I think that they can do that, but the way that the game is being called and it's playing out on the field is not reflecting a desire to want to do that. I think that's an area where Nebraska can have some success. But, you know, they feel like they've got to, you know, throw to open things up for the running game. But I don't know. I mean, there's just not, we've gotten the identity question, you know, since before the season even started. And I mean, we're not any closer on October 22nd than we were on August 15th to knowing what that actually is. Because I think, you know, to me, the identity is like, part of it is kind of what you want to do, but it's also what you can do and you have done. And Nebraska just has not done anything to this point with enough consistency to point to and say, like, that's who we are. That's what a team has to prepare for. It just feels right now, it's very just kitchen sinky right now.
I could spend the entirety of this podcast just asking you guys questions on the offense, but there was a whole other side of the ball that had their own issues that were wildly on display on Saturday. And we won't spend any time on special teams. So, yes, I am talking about the defense. Brian, you mentioned that tackling was poor as it maybe had been at any point all season, is what I believe Matt Rhule said on the Monday press conference. I want to start with this part of it. What are your thoughts on where Nebraska's defense finds itself, and what is your confidence that they can sort of move past what happened Saturday, and that was more of a blip and less of a total foundation shaking moment that it might have felt like as it was going on?
I think it's a defense that can play really well against certain offenses. And right now, it's put enough on tape against other units that it's going to be really tough right now. And I don't know how you repair some of it. Like this Saturday, I expect to be very difficult. I mean, obviously, because Ohio State's really talented, but I just don't like the matchups at all either. After that, I do think there's some games in November where you can see this defense play closer to maybe what they were like against Purdue or Rutgers. But the key is, can you get through this stretch, including this week, without having what you are bringing up in that question really, you know, shaken or, you know, just completely taken apart, and that's your confidence. So that's where you gotta. I just want to see them come out with like that tenacity, and it's back to that thing Rhule's saying, like, you have to go out there on Saturday at least and be like, I belong across from this guy I'm playing. Like, you have to have that mindset no matter what's being said. And I was just so disappointed Saturday in how it just folded so easily in the second half. Like, because there's so many veterans on this defense. Yeah. And I know they had Nebraska on ice skates and they didn't know if run or pass and all this stuff. But I mean, the backup QB comes in and just makes it look easy for Indiana. And the holes were just constantly there, and the run fits were completely off. From the football part, they've got to get like their run fits and stuff like that right, that I'm not an expert in talking about, but I know when they're completely off. And there were just guys picking the wrong spots and being in the wrong gaps on certain plays. And you have to really drive it home. Like, you pick the wrong spot against these teams, a 4-yard gain is a 60-yard gain. And Indiana was the type of squad that had guys who could do that too. And Ohio State certainly does too. So I don't know. They're going to have to play a really great game at the second level. Ty and Nash were completely neutralized, taken out of that game Saturday. They've somehow got to have an impact. There's just so many things you got to go down. But the big thing is, can you keep your confidence and have at least an encouraging performance on Saturday where you get to the last 4 games and you say, all right, let's get now to that defense that we were prior to Indiana. That's the big thing.
I think BC covered a lot of it, Bruntz, but kind of what were your thoughts on the defense and sort of your thoughts on what Matt Rhule had to say both after the game and Monday about where Nebraska's defense at and where it wants to be?
Yeah, I mean, I think Brian summed it up pretty well. I mean, you go through the entirety of that game. I mean, there were very, very, very few times when Nebraska's defensive players won one-on-ones. And I'm not talking about, the cornerbacks, and Matt Rhule highlighted kind of the rough day they had. And it was a rough day. I mean, any deep ball that Indiana wanted was completed in that game. And, at some point, you can scheme it up. You can have guys, where they're supposed to be. But at some point, you just need somebody to make a play. And I think at times this defense has been okay with guys rising to the occasion and making a play. And it just it never happened at Indiana. I mean, you didn't have guys batting balls down. You didn't have guys getting off blocks. You didn't have guys getting into the backfield with regularity. I mean, it was just a total nothing burger from a group that's, I think been solid for the most part. I think Indiana's got some guys on that side of the ball, and I think Curtis Rourke is a pretty good quarterback. But it never seemed like Nebraska's defense was in that fight at all. And, I have more confidence in that group kind of bouncing back over the latter half of the season than I do with what you can find on offense. But I mean, I think it's time that like you said, it's a veteran group. Guys need to have some pride and play hard. Like I didn't think that the defense was playing hard on Saturday against Indiana. And I know Matt Rhule will never question effort and that kind of stuff, but they seemed like they were playing slow. And that's the first time I think I've said that about that defense, basically since Michigan last year.
None of us have the ability to make decisions or changes or anything that actually affects the Nebraska football program. But as you're looking at it today, is there anything that you think, like an immediate change that you think could help Nebraska, BC? Is there anything that you think, is it a player that you think needs to be highlighted more? Is it a certain schematic thing that needs to be done? There's more than just one fix. I think that's obvious. But is there something glaring that stands out to you of what we're seeing right now?
I think there's small things in there you can do that maybe improve it a little bit, but I don't know that there's not some surefire answer. Like, for instance, a small thing that I like sprinkled in a little bit more, actually. And I know when Harburg's on the field, it's like, oh, he's going to run the ball. That's what the defense thinks. Although you could do some stuff off of that. But when we were driving back, I mentioned to Bruntz, I was like, the only time Indiana in that game on defense was like, hey, what are you doing, buddy? Was when Harburg ran the option down to about the 11-yard line on the drive when it was 7-0. And there's moments like that where I was at that in real time. I was like, do it again. I was like Herb Brooks, like, run it again, I just think sometimes there's a play or two like that where something happens and I'd like them to just go back to it and like see if they can stop it, And so I wouldn't mind seeing him sprinkled in a little bit more. And I'm not going to get dramatic about that, but I just think a little bit more. And then I think Bly Hill is a guy that is interesting down the stretch as you think about the secondary. Mazuka, I think you're seeing him maybe slide in the left tackle. We'll see if that's full go now. After this game, he played 44 snaps. But aside from that, we went over some of the scheme stuff. You just got to do what you do better. You can't there's no wholesale changes with your operation at this point in the season. And so guys have to be embarrassed by the one-on-ones they lost and on the perimeter and all that. And there has to be just a determination, going to do everything they possibly can to right this ship. And the season's not lost. I mean, there's still potential to get a couple more and get this thing to a bowl and take a step, but you got to like stand up right now and not let this Saturday be the defining part of this season. It's definitely a stain though. It's going to be like that ketchup stain on the shirt. It's hard to get out. I don't think you can.
I think they have some sprays and stuff that you can use now that'll help with the.
You can get those out, I guess. Yeah.
I'm just, throwing it out there. We have a couple sprays. I'm a messy eater. I haven't ruined any shirts, so I can pass that along to you if you would like, Brian.
Okay.
So, I'm glad you started with Harburg because I was actually going to try to work in a question when we were talking on offense about him, because I think it's a bit of a conundrum because you have to take Rhule off the field, but the version of Rhule that we've seen the last couple of weeks has really struggled. And I think it's pretty evident Nebraska struggles to run the football without any concept of a quarterback run game. If Bruntz, is there a way that you can feature Heinrich Harburg more without it being like, is there a way you can get him on the field more than we've seen without it overtaking what you want to do? Or, is there, how can you kind of blend that? Because I think you need that element. And I also think that he can pass too. Like you can throw the option pass in there at some point, and you might see a guy streaking wide open down the middle of the field. But to do this comes with taking Dylan Rhule off the field.
Yeah. I mean, I think the way to make it less obvious of what Nebraska is going to do when Harburg is in there is you need him in there more. Like you have to give teams more looks than what you've given them to this point to think about when he's out there. And we're driving back on Sunday. I was thinking like, okay, what did we kind of come into the season saying? Like one reason that there was confidence that this offense was going to be better this year was because Nebraska was better around the quarterback. And I don't know that that's being shown to be true right now. And I think part of that is it's just so haphazard. I mean, if schematically and what Nebraska can do, and I don't know if I necessarily like Ohio State in my mind is kind of like a one-off from like what's left after that.
Sure.
game.
Yeah, I agree.
But Nebraska has to find some kind of a running game with the running backs where Heinrich Harburg is not your leading rusher in the game. Like you can't basically pass for most of the first two possessions on offense. Like you need to be able to get Dowdell or whoever into some kind of a rhythm and at least make teams respect the fact that you're going to try to run the ball without just all of a sudden abandoning it and starting to throw it. So I think that's what I would do is, if they're going to stick with Mazuka at left tackle, I think he's a better run blocker in the game for them. And I think you have to find ways to just say, this is what we're going to do. We're going to control the ball, control the clock, and try to help out Dylan a little bit because right now the problem is, you kind of know that's almost kind of window dressing when they're trying to run the ball. So everybody's just keyed on Rhule and that it's not working. There's no mystery there. So I don't know how they do that. If they find 2 or 3 runs you can repeat, but I'm not run the ball guy by any means, and I'm fine with airing it out.
I'm expecting you to bend down the bill of your hat. And it's just going to say run the ball right across.
No, there's nothing there.
There's nothing.
I
you can write it with marker.
Yeah. But you got to figure out something there, and actually do more than pay lip service to wanting to be a physical team and move the ball on the ground.
Do you think they could do? I'm just asking. Do you think they could find a little something to put themselves in better down and distances by going more heavy with when they've had Lindenmeyer and Liebentritt, like when they go real heavy, like on short distance, 3rd and 1, 4th and 1s, they've actually mostly gotten what they want on those particular plays, but that's sort of when we see it and then it disappears. And I know it was against bad competition last year, but I remember the game against Northern Louisiana Tech or somebody when Nebraska went real heavy and just basic toss plays and Liebentritt got after some guys. I'm not saying to make that the staple of your offense. I just wonder if there's some of that you can put in there to try to get yourself into hopefully some 3rd and 4s, especially in a game like this, 3rd and 5s where you give your quarterback a chance to let it rip, like I'm saying. I'm not just saying to haphazardly doing that, but getting yourself in spots where you're not tentative and then, okay, let's take our shot here with a quarterback that we think can make some plays, and let's see what he can do against this type of defense.
I need to look. I would be curious. I haven't done the research on this, but I would be very curious to see what Nebraska is averaging on 3rd down over the last 3 games versus what they were at the start of the season, because it's felt like first 3-4 games of the year, they were in much, much more manageable 3rd down situations than what they've been in over the last few games. Sorry, Schaefer, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, you're good. I think yet again, teams have basically taken a very simplistic approach to playing Nebraska's offense. You're going to body up the wide receivers on the outside. We saw Purdue started to do that, and they got called for a bunch of flags, and that kind of helped Nebraska get through it. Rutgers did that to a degree. Nebraska couldn't really throw the ball much in that game. Indiana did that, and Nebraska elected to throw a bunch of underneath passes. I think a lot of that is a symptom of they can't run. Like they literally cannot line up and run the football with a lot of success because their line is not getting off of first blocks to second. Like they can't set up enough with their offensive line and their running game. And I just think if you try to go to a heavy formation, you're going to have more bodies in there, but so is the defense.
Yeah.
And they're already just playing on top of you. So it's a really tough spot to be, because I understand the inclination that you want to create more 3rd manageables, but some of that comes with the idea that you're even getting 2 or 3 yards out of those initial runs, because that's basically what they're getting right now. Like the run defense have gotten better as Nebraska's season has gone along, because they're just committing more people to the box because they're not worried about being played over the top of, because the receivers have been taken out of it. Like they're somehow, despite having an entirely different quarterback, they're right back to where they were last year in October, where teams have basically committed to playing 8 guys in the box against you because you haven't shown the ability to go downfield and you can't really move anybody with your offensive line. Like it fascinates me. They're in the same spot as they were a year ago with an entirely different looking offense, but the same problem exists. You can't really run it because of the numbers in the box, and you aren't winning, as Bruntz has said many times in this pod, you aren't winning one-on-one outside. Like the corners for other teams are just taking Nair and Banks out of games. That's a big concern.
Yeah, it goes back to what Rhule brought this up. It was like in the spring or something when he was talking about Nebraska's got to get way better against press coverage. And
they did not.
No. And so that's there again, they're in a pickle. Like that's, I bring up the Liebentritt thing. You're just throwing out that's what you're at though. You're like throwing out like, oh, well, you could do this or that, but maybe not. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of easy answers. So, this is tough because of the way the schedule sets up. You just took one as on the chin as bad as they did. And now, you play this kind of team. That's where you got to keep your vibes up within those walls when it's going to be very down outside of them about what you can get done the rest of the year. So this is going to be the biggest test of the Rhule era so far. Somehow, some way, they've got to find some things that encourage them. You go to fight on Saturday and somehow get to 6-3 at the next bye. That's got to be it. And then you can kind of reassess and try to make a push for something down the stretch. But that's what's on the table now.
Nebraska picked up a commitment on Sunday, even after the loss. The commitment came before Sunday, but it was announced on Sunday. Juju Marks from Olathe South committed, an offensive lineman. He's a defensive lineman. Offensive lineman will be playing offensive line at the college level. Likely a tackle. 6'6", roughly 290 pounds, 6'10" wingspan. So he's got really long arms. Can theoretically keep your pass rushers at bay, keep your quarterback clean, playing from the tackle spot. So Nebraska flips Juju Marks, Kansas commitment at one time. Bruntz, we don't have to spend a lot of time on this, but any sort of immediate takeaways from you of Nebraska adding another offensive lineman, Nebraska getting another kid from suburban Kansas City?
I like the Kansas City stuff. That's that's been an area that feels like this fall has gotten a little bit more of a refocus with, Kansas City, St. Louis, with Keith Williams and Jamar Mosby on staff. Both those guys have strong connections throughout the state of Missouri and in the Kansas City metro area. And, it's an area that I think is worth pursuing. I mean, it's your closest major metropolitan area. I think the juice is worth the squeeze there. And, this is a good win. I mean, I don't know that he was on a ton of people's radars when he committed, but, when they've had the opportunity to send guys out, those two have spent a lot of time on the road, doing a lot of work behind the scenes. And I think that's one benefit to Nebraska with these rule changes, where you can kind of dictate who your counting recruiters are. And, they've got two guys that are well connected. And I think this was one of those commitments that Nebraska was able to get because of those connections. And, he's a high upside kid. He's, I think, relatively new to football still. So, an offensive tackle that you can kind of grow and build. And it feels like Nebraska's starting to do an okay job of stockpiling those types of guys. They've already got a couple in the program as true freshmen right now who are going to redshirt, but I like the pickup.
Yeah. Brian, you got any thoughts? Nebraska adds an offensive lineman to the stable, joins Sean Hammerbeck, Brian Tapu, and Houston Kahina-Torres.
Bruntz hit it well. I mean, I just think Jamar Mosby was a great staff addition. Keith Williams has been grinding as hard as anybody. So you see the fruits of their labor there. And I think you'll continue to, with Mosby and the way he can connect with kids. And it's not just because he was a high school coach, in the area. I think he's just got that gift of with personality with the players, the way they talk about him and how they feel like he looks at them as more than a player. And that always matters when you're recruiting. So he's going to be a big asset for this program.
I said it on the message board. Well, actually, I said it in a story, but also on the message board. I think if Nebraska makes coaching changes internally, he's one of the guys that could be elevated to a full-time role. Wouldn't surprise me. We've seen Rhule say before in the past he likes to get high school coaches in his program because they know how to talk to younger guys. He thinks that helps with the recruiting and all of that stuff. I would not be surprised to see Jamar Mosby in a full-time role coaching-wise for Nebraska after the 2024 season. So we'll see how that all plays out. Juju Marks, the number 20 commit for Nebraska, the number 23 class. Currently, they're still focused on adding guys in 2025, but they're also doing a lot of work in 2026 and 2027 as well. UCLA at 2:30 will give them another opportunity to have a pretty decent visit weekend. They're one of two games remaining. I would imagine they're going to try to get as many people as they can, given you're coming down on the amount of home games that you have. That will be everything for us here at Husker 24/7. BC Bruntz, any final words?
No more words from me. Nope.
No. All right. They have nothing to add. I have nothing to add. So for Michael Bruntz, Brian Christopherson, I'm Mike Schaefer. We're Husker 24/7. Check out everything we have going on at Husker247.com. We'll catch you next time.